All right, thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm truly feel lucky to be here and share my story with you all. I wrote in my blog about imposter syndrome, and I know maybe not everyone knows it by name, but I definitely have it, and I'm going to talk even just open up a little bit about that. I was telling my husband this morning that I was glad I had a big breakfast because as I was getting ready, I felt really nervous already. And I have young kids, and that was hours ago. But talking about myself is not easy, and it's something I've always struggled with. And so I know that I have experienced a lot and accomplished a lot, and I am excited to share that with you. I'm excited to learn from you. In preparing for this and reflecting on my career, I learned a lot. I was telling Tracy right before you all got on that it's funny that we don't really set aside time, especially now with how busy we all are, to think about how we got here. So it's been really a pleasure to be invited and be a part of this. And I'm really going to go quick because I'm looking more forward to the Q&A session where we can be candid and I don't feel so much on stage. But with that said, next slide, please, Tracy. So I just started with this quote. It's funny, I built this presentation in Canva, which is a great tool. If you've never used it, it helps you make really well-designed presentations pretty easily. And when you download the PowerPoint, it actually, while you're waiting, it puts up really interesting quotes about growth. And both of my quotes are from there because I thought, wow, this really is speaking to the story I'm telling today. So this quote was stolen from Canva and Anthony Hicks, who I looked up and was a naturalist. But my story, I think, is really about having to leave my ego at home. And I've learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. And so I just hope that as you hear my story, you keep these words in mind. Next slide, please. So this slide is just, I'm not going to go into each experience. Between the time I was a high school senior, I worked at IHOP, and then now I'm at the city of San Antonio. But I would say throughout my 20s, I was very much in an exploratory phase. IHOP is where I had a bunch of friends who had a different lived experience than me. I was 18. I went to a private school. I was somewhat sheltered, but I had waitress friends there that were 18 and had kids of their own already, had not graduated from high school. One friend of mine, I dropped off one day and his door was missing from the front of his house. There were other experiences I had there where I had to work 2, even one day, 3 shifts in a row because people couldn't come in for very serious reasons, domestic violence and other things. So that set the stage for my career trajectory, really. I ended up at a law firm coming out of college. I thought I wanted to be an attorney. But when I explained to the attorneys I was working for at the time why I wanted to be an attorney, I was talking a lot about social justice. And the attorney I admired the most said, you know, that's what he thought he was going to do. But in order to pay off his student debt, he went to go work for a private law firm, got married, had kids, the expenses started building up, and he never made it into social justice. So I took the LSAT, was all ready. I had 8 applications ready to go. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna put this on hold and I'm gonna go to New York City and I'm gonna live on couches for 6 months while I work on political campaigns, make no money at all, and learn a thing or two. And I did. I learned a lot in New York City politics. I ended up working for a politician, for New York City councilman for 2 years, saw the good, bad, and the ugly, and for some reason thought the next great step for me was to be a union organizer. And the funny part about that is that the firm that I worked for, Skadden Arps Law Firm, actually was a union busting firm. So 2 years later, here I am working for the unions that when I was working at the law firm, we were trying to bust. So a lot of varied experience in those years. It led me to graduate school, which is what I'm going to talk about in the next slide, and which is where most of you guys, I understand, are at. So I'll talk a little bit about how that was a pivot point for me. But just know that when I went into graduate school, I didn't know that it was the right thing to do. I had thought I was going to go to law school. I thought about all different types of school. I ended up picking up a public affairs degree at the University of Texas in Austin. I'm sorry, not San Antonio. But it just seemed like a general enough degree that it would give me some time to step back and reflect on these very, very varied experiences, and try to make sense of it all. And so it was there when I was in graduate school that I actually started working at the Texas legislature. And I realized that in my program, it was very theoretical and it wasn't very applied. And so you'll see in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what ended up happening. Sorry, next slide, please, Tracy. So what ended up happening is that I got frustrated while in graduate school. Well, two things were happening. One is that at that time, our public affairs school was run by a deputy State Department director named Jim Steinberg. He was the number 2 behind Hillary Clinton. And the reason that he was recruited is because they wanted it to be a global affairs public policy school, which was great. They were opening up a global affairs program, and they had a big standing in national affairs. So a lot of people that left the LBJ school would go and work for the national government. But we'd lost sight of how much you could just do in your own backyard. And so I was getting frustrated that all my classes felt very theoretical and very far away. And we were talking about fixing things, but we weren't doing anything right there in Austin, our capital, where the Texas legislature is. So I did 2 things. No, I did 3 things really that helped alleviate this just dissonance that I was feeling in graduate school. One, I started volunteering at the Texas legislature, and I took an internship at the city of Austin. 2, I took a class from the woman whose picture is here. Her name's Cheryl Scully. She's the former city manager of San Antonio, actually. She just left about a year and a half ago. And 3, I started an organization there called Citizens for Local and State Service. And what we did is just highlight what was happening right there in our community. We created a mentoring program where people could shadow different folks right there in Austin. We did a mayoral debate where we brought the debate right to the LBJ school so people would get engaged and learn about the candidates and vote. And there were a number of other things we did just to elevate the importance of public service at that level. At that time, it wasn't quite as sexy. I think now, because of what's happening at the federal level, and just even with the pandemic, seeing how much the global level is sometimes out of our control, people do see the role of cities. So it's a little bit cooler, I would say, since I graduated to work for cities. And the only other thing I'll point out here is I think it was also a pivot point, because I think Citizens for Local and State Services, when I first started creating new things. And so the rest of my presentation, I think you'll see that it's only recently that I've realized I'm good at this. And so I'm 39, and it's taken years to figure out that, oh, wow, I get frustrated by something, I see a need, and my brain just keeps going, and I can't let it go. And in the shower, or during times of rest, I just start jotting things on paper, and I'm very well suited to that brainstorming, that creativity, and then launching. And I just had a talk with my boss yesterday, funnily enough, about how I don't want to get a reputation of just launching things and leaving. That I do care about the things that I co-create, because no one creates in a vacuum. But it's hard because I just start to think about the next thing. And I say all this to say I'm still struggling with my professional development and growth. So next slide, please, Tracy. So these are some of the things I've designed and launched for the city of San Antonio. SA Speak Up, CivTech SA, R&D League, and even now I'm brainstorming a new program. And when I put this slide together, it was a month ago for a Rising Stars District 8 class. These were high school seniors. And it's just funny that Tracy asked me to do this for you guys, and the slides didn't change all that much. And I didn't have any leads on a mindfulness program for frontline staff, but just yesterday, I figured out a way I might be able to make it happen. I've been thinking about that for 4 years though. So it's just interesting how things have to bake and evolve and come up when the time is right. And so I won't go into this program and these four programs in detail here because I actually have slides on each. So next slide, please. And a reason to give you a slide is not just to tell you about the things I'm passionate in and what I've done, but also because I want you to engage. They're all engagement programs. I've realized I'm very passionate about engagement and creating opportunities for folks to play a role in the direction of their communities. And so this was one of my very first work babies. It's called SA Speak Up, and it's an opportunity for residents to provide input on a number of things. But what drove this program originally was we wanted input on the budget process. So we have a multi-billion-dollar budget. This is your tax dollars at play. What goes into that budget is the blueprint for what the city will do over the course of the year, where we will focus and prioritize funding. And at the time when I started with the Office of Innovation about 8 years ago, we would have these budget meetings where it would be the same 500 people providing input every year. And in a city of 1.5 million, that is an extremely small percentage of the population. It was also primarily representing an elderly demographic. We weren't hearing from a lot of families and a lot of youth because they're very busy and just don't have time to come out to a meeting. We were expecting them to come to us. And because I had been in politics and I'd run campaigns, I knew that the style of it needed to be more campaign-like. There needed to be multiple channels. So now there's some in-person opportunities, well, not during the pandemic, but those opportunities are where we go out into communities at events that are already happening, things like the Pearl Farmers Market and flea markets in different parts of the community. And we have a lot of online opportunities to provide input and interact. And so that program is now hosted out of our public affairs department, and they do a great job of it. In the first year that I designed and launched it, we were able to triple our input by 3 times. So we went from 500 to, I think it was 1,500, but now they're getting over 20,000. And it's much more dynamic. They're collecting demographic data so they know who they're hearing from. And I'm just really proud of the direction that they've taken that program. So please follow the hashtag, look for the handle, just Google it, it'll come up. You'll see surveys on all types of things. The departments, it's also turned into our citywide campaign. So departments are now required when they want to survey the community to put that logo on it, to brand it so that the community can get used to understanding, okay, we're talking about where to put money into parks or where to place public art. Speak up about that. But I think at the heart of it, well, it'll always be a big part of it will be getting input on the budget. So I hope, and the budget process is happening right now. So I hope you will go provide your input. Next slide, please. This program came out of, it was actually inspired by the city of San Francisco. They had started something called STIR, which stands for Startup in Residence. They have a huge startup community there, and they realized that the way that government was operating wasn't capitalizing on these very dynamic things that were happening in the startup community and the technology that was being produced, and that we were still kind of living in the Stone Ages. And so it was a great idea. So we stole it, like all good ideas, you steal them. And, but we expanded upon it, and we made it more about what San Antonio needed. We didn't have as many startups here, but what we had were a lot of people that were hungry to build startups, and we had a lot of great STEM programs. So we tapped, working with Geekdom, a local co-working space that's really involved in the tech startup community. We built relationships with middle school, high schools, universities, and just the entrepreneur base, and then startups. So there's kind of a talent funnel that is being built, connecting both between those communities, mentoring and projects, but also then using those to grow the startups that then will come in the city through a STIR-like program. These startups come into the city, they embed for 16 weeks and co-create a solution hand in hand with a department. And we've had quite a few great products come out of this. The city then goes on if they're happy with the product and the relationship to procure the technology. It's really changed the face of the way that our community interacts with us and the way we deliver services. So that's been great. It's helped us innovate. It also helps these local startups grow their businesses. So that's great. And then the third and thing that makes me happiest is it kind of like Teach for America, if you've ever heard that. It takes these really smart people and embeds them in government, so then they carry that civic mindedness with them as they continue to create and develop technologies that help our community. So it brings up the startup thinking into the city, and it brings the city, the public servant bent into the startup community. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and I should say, follow CivTech SA. They have a lot of opportunities to engage as well. They just did a series of questioning bias in public health data. So, it was called Community Conversations. They were asking people just like y'all to comment on some of the things we should be thinking about when collecting data and answering public health questions. So next slide, Tracy, thanks. So this is my current baby. I am the R&D Administrator right now for the city. And in that role, I was asked to create the city's first R&D program, R&D process. So R&D stands for research and development. I'm thinking since you guys are younger, you've all heard of it. It's very ubiquitous in especially the private sector, but also the academic sectors and research sectors. It is a way of innovating. It is a way of trying to really think ahead in terms of what our communities will need, and testing and experimenting with new ideas in technology and capturing those lessons learned to inform the way we operate. Since I've been at the city, and I've worked now for 3 cities, I've worked for the state, I've worked for the federal government. It's not just the city of San Antonio. We feel the pressure because we are stewards of the taxpayer dollar to act like we have all the answers. But the truth is that we don't. And we need to create space to learn and try new things. It's the only way to grow. And so as a culture, we need to be able to experiment. And really for people who say, well, I don't want you to use my tax dollars experimenting, I actually would say this is actually a cost saving measure. Because if you expect us to come to you with all the answers when we roll out technology, and then we find out along the way that we didn't know what we didn't know, and that technology is not working the way we thought, we've already spent that money. So this type of experimentation allows us to get those lessons learned and answers up front, so that it informs the way we spend our money and the way we direct new services. So the only other thing I'll say here is I really should have put logos for USAA, UTSA, and Southwest Research Institute on this slide, because they are our partners in this. When I was hired or promoted to be the city's R&D Administrator, the city manager told me, okay, you're coming at me with another crazy idea. I'm gonna let you do it, but I'm not gonna give you any funding. And I'm only giving you 1 staff member. So obviously we can't launch experiments with 2 people who don't have PhDs, who aren't really qualified to do academic level research. So if it weren't for the partner, we created a partnership with USAA, UTSA, and Southwest Research Institute, and they're actually the ones bringing the PhDs and engineers and designers and scientists who design the experiments, launch the experiments, capture the lessons. What Rhea and I do, and what is really, I think, useful to the program, is we help translate what they're learning into lessons that just regular folks can understand, folks in our department, our community. And so there's a role to play for, public servants being the experts in that space. And we also help match up our departments again with these researchers, so that they're actually solving a challenge and that they're learning about the way the city works and not building things that don't work in a city environment. I really would like to invite you to join us on October 20th. We are going to have a symposium where we're bringing top researchers from UTSA. Actually, one of our speakers is Dr. Lynn Kosman, your new dean, head of the, let me see if I can get it right, Health, Community, and Policy College. It's a really big deal that you guys have this new college. It's awesome. She's going to be speaking at it. And a bunch of her professors in her department and the engineering departments, the business departments, the architecture department. I mean, we worked with a lot of folks. If you go to the website, you'll see all the different departments we work with at UTSA. All of those people are going to be there. I'm bringing a bunch of practitioners from the city, from different 13 departments to that symposium, and then a bunch of designers and engineers from SWERI and USAA will be there. What's missing is the resident voice. We're going to spend a full day talking about challenges, but we want to hear from the residents about the challenges, and then we'll ideate with you. We'll co-create, we'll co-brainstorm throughout the day about what the nuances of the challenges are, and what are some assets we have locally to solve them. And really the goal coming out of this will be to create kind of new ideas that we can put into grant applications and try to attract some funding to San Antonio to solve some of these challenges. And if you go to the website, you'll learn more, but it's things that we're experiencing right now around the pandemic and racial injustice, and just the way the city's growing so quickly, and are we prepared for that? Those are the types of questions we'll be, and poverty and inequity we'll be asking ourselves that day. And there'll be some training on human-centered design and equity that day that's informed by data and a lot of things that the city and our researchers are doing. So it's a really great opportunity to learn, but more importantly, to engage and be a part of the process. Next slide. So in the District 8 Rising Leaders, they wanted me to talk about visioning and what is that process like for me. And so I left the slide in here because it was an interesting, going back and thinking, how did I even get here? What does work for me? Where do these ideas come from? What works well for me? I thought it might be useful to you all because you guys all have varied skill sets. You're going to come up with ideas that I'm never going to come up with, and I want to encourage that. And so the things that I've learned over time that work well for me are, I'm a very high energy person, and I'm kind of all over the place. I actually had an ex-boyfriend tell me one time that when he talked to me, it felt like all of my neurons were firing at one time. And so in order for those neurons to kind of settle and for the puzzle pieces to actually come together, for me personally, it requires a meditation practice, finding ways to calm myself, walks, and just being aware of who I am and kind of falling into that space. I think now with the onslaught of technology and media and just how much information we're getting, I actually think this one works for any type of personality. I think we're all just getting a lot of stimuli, and I think to have those aha moments, we have to find space and quiet for ourselves and self-care and prioritize that. So that's the first thing that I've learned. The second thing I've learned is that positivity and creativity are intertwined. I don't know what it is about me, but for some reason, I just think I can do whatever I want. We can do anything. Even I've been at the city 8 years, and I've heard all the reasons that we can't do something. And it's true, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and it's hard to get buy-in, and funding issues and the scrutiny that comes with being stewards of the taxpayer dollar are all very difficult. But I mean, if that's the place you start from, you just never really come up with the creative solutions to get past that. So I think just starting from a place of, to utilize Barack Obama's term, yes, we can, I think is really helpful. And then finally, and maybe I should have started here, but you know, I talk a lot about where do I get my visioning ideas from? I mean, a lot of my ideas aren't really my ideas. I think I bring a lot of energy to situations, and I'm willing to be vulnerable and put bad ideas out there. And I think the more bad ideas I put out there, the more people play off of those ideas, and we actually come up with a good idea. So I think just accepting that you don't have all the answers, you know, not being scared to throw out an idea out there, even though it's half-baked, which I do a lot. I feel like, what? But it gets them thinking about something new. I think that's really where the best ideas come from, and the best visioning it's an exercise in teamwork, really, and vulnerability. Next slide, please. And I think here, I just wanted to end on some words to reflect on, which is, it always seems impossible until it's done. So, you know, that's just first of all, Nelson Mandela is just a wonderful person that we have a lot to learn from. And I just think that when you think of innovation, that which is what the world I'm in, and I have been in for 8 years, and I probably will never really leave this space completely. I think it's just important to realize that anything seems impossible when you first start out, but you do it and then it's no longer impossible. I mean, we just shot, like the private sector is shooting people up to space now. So a lot of things can happen, guys. Next slide, please. Oh, yay, it's done.